During the brutal religious conflicts of the 12th century, one commander achieved something exceedingly rare. He earned the absolute respect of the armies he fought. His name was Saladin. He dismantled a century of European military control in the Middle East, yet history remembers him most for his remarkable restraint in the aftermath of victory. To understand how unusual that restraint was, we have to look at the baseline of warfare he was born into. The 11th and 12th centuries were defined by merciless sieges, scorched earth campaigns, and little regard for civilian life. Surviving in that era usually required adopting its cruelty. Choosing to wage war ethically in such a violent age makes Saladin's record an extraordinary historical anomaly. This map shows the Levant around 1140. By 1099, European armies had carved out heavily fortified Crusader states right along the Mediterranean coast. But looking eastward, the Muslim world was deeply fractured. Control was split among competing factions, with no central authority to coordinate them. Because these local rulers were constantly fighting each other for territory and influence, they could not mount a unified defense. The European kingdoms easily exploited these regional rivalries. European strongholds stood for nearly 100 years, largely because the regional powers were simply too divided to push them out. Saladin was born in Tikrit into a prominent Kurdish military family. He steadily climbed the ranks of the regional armies, eventually becoming a leading political figure in Egypt. He realized early on that throwing isolated armies at fortified Crusader castles was a waste of resources. Real power required a unified political will. Through a careful mix of diplomacy, strategic alliances, and precise military force, he spent years systematically merging Egypt and Syria under his own leadership, effectively encircling the European territories. With a massive combined force finally at his disposal, the tactical problem remained. How do you physically uproot an enemy that has spent a century building impenetrable stone fortresses? Before a single sword was swung at the main European army, Saladin had already won half the war by turning dozens of rival factions into a single, cohesive geopolitical machine. The decisive clash arrived in 1187 near the Sea of Galilee. Saladin knew better than to assault the heavily defended Crusader cities directly. Instead, he laid siege to a smaller town, intentionally drawing the main European field army out of their safe, well-supplied positions and into the blistering heat of the July desert. As the Crusader army marched across the arid plateau toward the Horns of Hattin, Saladin's light cavalry harassed them, simultaneously blocking their only routes to fresh water springs. Trapped in the open terrain and surrounded by brush fires set by Muslim troops, the European soldiers suffered extreme dehydration. Exhaustion severely eroded their formations long before the main assault began. The Crusader forces were completely destroyed. Without their central field army, the remaining European cities were left defenseless. Heavy armor and European tactics failed against an opponent who understood that terrain, temperature, and water supply determined the outcome of a battle far more than numbers. Later that same year, Saladin marched his victorious army to the massive stone walls of Jerusalem, the most symbolically vital prize in the region. Almost a century earlier, Crusaders breached these very walls and slaughtered nearly everyone inside. Retaliation was the standard practice of the era, but Saladin chose a different path. He engaged the city's defenders and negotiated a peaceful surrender. When the gates opened, Christian residents were allowed to buy their safe passage out of the city without harm. This display of mercy stunned observers, provoking a massive military response from Europe, launching the Third Crusade and bringing Saladin face-to-face with King Richard the Lionheart. This specific restraint established a reputation that outlasted the medieval kingdoms he fought, ensuring he remained a respected figure in both the East and the West for the next 8 centuries. Though the Crusades would continue for decades, Saladin's campaigns permanently shifted the balance of power in the Levant back to the Islamic world. He commanded intense military discipline on the battlefield, yet he emptied his treasury, funded public works, built massive hospitals, and cared for the poor. Today, the man who commanded vast empires and crushed massive armies is buried in a modest structure in Damascus. He recovered one of the most fiercely contested cities in human history, And he managed to do it while preserving his own strict code of ethics. Saladin's survival in the collective memory rests on the fact that he conquered the world's most contested city without surrendering his sense of justice.